It's one of the most famous British sports cars of all time, driven by the likes of James Bond and Leonardo DiCaprio. It's the DB line. Strangely, the first DB wasn't actually called a DB. It was called the 2-liter Sports, based off a World War II era Aston Martin concept called the Atom. And it was initially planned to be a road racing version of a 24 Hours of Spa competitor. But, no one wanted it, so the owner of Aston Martin at the time, David Brown, DB, reworked the design into a more traditional roadster that would sell. It was actually not bad for 1950. It had 90 horsepower and a top speed of 93 miles an hour. Only 15 were ever made, so they weren't exactly a sales sensation. Not until the DB2 came out was the 2-liter Sports even considered a DB car. But with the success of the 2, they retroactively called the 2-liter Sports the DB1 because it doesn't make sense to start out with 2. But anyway, the DB2 came out again in 1950, and the original Lagonda, yep, Aston Martin owns Lagondas, that's the official name of Aston Martin Lagonda. No one brings that up because it's a weird name, and Aston Martin's way better, but it's technically the name. So Lagonda had a straight 6-engine making 105 horsepower, which meant this car actually started to somewhat have mild performance. I say that, it did 0 to 60 in 11.2 seconds. Which still ain't great, I'll be honest. They made 411 of them, though, much more successful than DB1, including fastbacks and convertibles, so they're starting to branch out a little bit. They also branched out into motorsport. The DB2 finished first and second in a 3-liter class in 1951, 24 Hours of Le Mans, and finished third overall in the race. That's pretty darn good, and it would set a precedent for what the DBs would do at Le Mans. But in the meantime, on the road, a revised version of the DB2 was made called a DB2-4 for 1953-1950, and they made over 500 of the things. And they continued making version after version after version of the DB2 all the way up until 1959. Now, this is when things get a little bit tricky, because road-wise, the DB-Series skipped from the DB2 all the way to the DB4, but that wasn't the next DB. No, because they didn't just skip the 3. The 3 was for racing only, because they decided to split the DB cars between road cars and racing cars, so that the even ones were road cars and the odd ones were racing cars, I think. They started, didn't finish it, but anyway, the DB3 came out actually in 1951, during the DB2 development, actually. And it made 163 horsepower, the most of any DB car to date. And it was okay. Only 10 were made, including a few of them were lighter, called the DB3S, which was also okay. It wasn't that great in racing, I'll be honest. But the DB4, which came after the DB2 and not the DB3 for reasons unknown to science, was very good. A full refresh of the DB line, in fact, with a dual overhead cam straight 6 with aluminum cylinder heads making 240 horsepower on the road. Also featured servo-assisted brakes on all 4 corners. This was a really good car. This is when the DB shape started to take off. It looks fantastic. In fact, it looks even better with the Zagato model when it came out in 1959, which had an extra 50 horsepower on top of it. Oh, and it was the fastest car in the world at the time, with 151 miles an hour top speed. That sounds terrifying in the 1950s. I will like to point out. The DB4 also marks when Aston Martin went from a niche manufacturing to a bit more mass production, with over 1,200 DB4s being produced in just 5 years, setting an Aston Martin record. They also made a special racing version called the Lightweight, which had all the bare essentials stripped out. Aluminum panels, aluminum everything pretty much. No interior, no wind-up windows, a roll cage, which is weird in the 50s. It was a proper racing car, and it was, again, okay. But let's say you wanted to go racing in the 50s with an Aston Martin. You didn't pick the DB4 Lightweight, as great as it was. You picked this little car called the DBR1. You see, rewinding a bit to 1956 at the launch of the DB4, Aston Martin took what they learned from the DB3S, that Lightning car I mentioned earlier that wasn't very successful, and they turned it into the DBR1, which was a lightweight, convertible, GT prototype car basically, if I'm honest, that competed at the top class at Le Mans throughout the 50s. And in 1959, the final year of DBR9 production, Carroll Shelby, of all people, scored a 1-2 finish with Aston Martin in their first, and to this date's only, overall win in the 24 Hours of Le Mans. And I'd like to point out, Carroll Shelby achieved that win while having a heart attack with a nitroglycerin pill under his tongue. That is dedication. That's why I love the guy. We gotta get back on track with Aston Martin. The DBR1 was so good that not only did it secure the outright win at Le Mans, it scored enough outright wins in the World and Sports Car Championship to secure the title, beating Ferrari with the 250 in your face. Oh, and chassis number 1 sold for £22 million at auction, making it the most expensive Aston Martin ever sold. So we have the most expensive Aston Martin in the 1950s, but it really takes until 1960s to get the most famous ever made. The DB5. They took a DB4 and basically just perfected it. The DB4 body was already fantastic, so the DB5 was just an evolution of that, and it looked even better, with luxuriously equipped reclining leather seats, wool carpets, electric windows in the 60s, twin fuel tanks, and chrome wheels. But this isn't just a luxury GT car, it's, again, a GT car, which means it's gotta have some speed, and that it did. 282 horsepower. Thanks to 3 carburetors mounted to that straight-six engine. This thing might just be one of my favorite British cars ever made. Ever? I love it. I've seen one of them. I still remember it. They also introduced the Vantage name for the first time in 1964 with a limited run 325 horsepower version. And that wasn't even the only special edition. No. Harold Radford Coach Builders made 12 shooting brake versions, which look beautiful, and one sold at auction for $1.8 million, aka the most expensive shooting brake in the world. But let's be honest here. We love the DB5 for its good looks, its comfort, its luxuriousness. But everyone knows the DB5 because of a certain Bond. James Bond. Yes, it was unveiled in 1963 with Goldfinger, James Bond's car of choice from Q Branch. It had machine guns, armor shields, an ejector seat, and oil slicks. This car has been used in almost every James Bond since, except for the Lotus ones and the Beamer ones. That is how good it is. It's one of the most recognizable movie cars of all time. It's amazing. It's so iconic, Aston Martin has partnered up with Eon Productions to make 25 replicas of the DB5 for the up-and-coming James Bond film, with fully functioning spy gadgets, such as an actual shield that may or may not be armor-plated, fake tire slashes that actually extend out, ramming bars that extend out, an oil slick that doesn't actually drop oil, but it does drop a liquid of some kind, and even pop-out machine guns that sadly don't work, although I do not expect that to last very long if I know people who will undoubtedly put real machine guns in there, because why not? Sure, they cost 3.3 million pounds each, but you got working spy gadgets on a road car. What's better than that? I'll tell you what wasn't better than that, the DB-6. Which was basically a DB5 that was a bit longer, with optional air conditioning though, but the longer length meant it didn't look quite as nice, the proportions weren't quite as good, although they did make a shooting brake version, but only 7 of them were made, which is a bit of a shame. So they saw that the DB6 was not nearly as successful as the DB5, so they changed tactics. The DBS was unveiled in 1967. It was the first DB version to be offered with a V8 instead of the straight 6, which made 320 horsepower and 330 torque. And this was also used by James Bond in His Majesty's Secret Service. But that didn't really help. It was discontinued 5 years later with less than 800 sold. And it was the last car to wear the DB badge for 20 years. And I say it was the last car wear for 20 years because the DB7 came back in 1994 because Aston Martin went bankrupt and Ford had bought them. And their first task was to make a new GT car. So they brought back the DB name, slapped on a 7, and, well, typical Ford, it was a bit of a parts bin special. So they used a heavily reworked Jag chassis, as well as components from things like a Mazda 323F, a Mazda 323 Estate, an MX-5, a Ford Scorpio, and a Citroen CX. Yeah, not really your top-tier automotive suppliers of choice for a sports car, but it didn't really matter because it had a supercharged straight 6 and a chassis tuned by Tom Walkinshaw Racing. So, it was actually not bad for basically a Jaguar XKR with a new badge on it. The Vantage name also returned with a V12. Yeah, a V12 and a DB. That is fantastic. Also meant a 0 to 60 time in just 5 seconds, which is the fastest in DB history short of the racing cars. Oh, and it had a top speed of 184 miles an hour. But that isn't even the best DB7. No. That belongs to TWR. You see, they may have tuned the chassis, but they wanted to see what they could do with the car, so they threw in their own Jaguar V12 from Le Mans to make 475 horsepower, and they threw on a ridiculous body kit that produced actual downforce to increase handling. The thing was absurd. Unfortunately, it was a one-off concept because nothing good ever happens from concepts, really. Out of the DB7, we skipped the DB8 for realsies this time. It wasn't a race car. They actually skipped it because they didn't want people to assume it had a V8, which kind of actually makes sense when I think about it. So, the DB9, as it became, was in 2004. It was the first Aston Martin ever intended with large volume production, with 1,500 expected per year, which is not very high volume, but for Aston Martin, that is incredibly high volume, and it worked, I will add. Why did it work? Well, it was gorgeous looking, with a streamlined body without visible bumpers, which makes it much more smoother, as well as being more aerodynamic. And, even though it's a tiny little car initially designed for a V8, they managed to squeeze a 450 horsepower, 5.9 liter V12. That could do 0 to 60 in 4.5 seconds, and if you wanted to stop, you had no issues, because it had carbon ceramic brakes and carbon fiber components, so it could stop much faster and handle much better. Although, it was more of a GT car, and the suspension was a bit softer with a plusher interior, and the handling was not nearly as good as its sportier rivals, but hey, it's a GT car, that's what you gotta expect. Now, it was a GT car, so it's not really a sports car. But it didn't stop it from competing in sports car racing, which led to the development and launch of the DBR9. Yep, the DBR name is back, as well as Aston Martin's return to motor racing. With full carbon fiber construction, it did use the chassis, the engine block, of the cylinder heads of the road car, but they beefed it up to 625 horsepower with massive diffusers, splitters, and wings. And it competed in the FIA GT Championship from 2005 to 2011. And needless to say, it was pretty darn good. It won the team's Drivers and Manufacturers Championship in 2006, wearing, yes, the 007 number. You are not reading that wrong, because Aston Martin knows how to play to their strengths. But its biggest accomplishments came in 2007 and 2008, where Aston Martin returned to Le Mans and won their class twice. Not bad, Aston Martin, not bad. Once again, wearing the 007 numbers. But say you didn't want a grand touring car, say you wanted a proper sports car. Well, they delivered with the DBS. The name returned again, which was basically just a sportier version of the DB9. So it had the same engine, making 510 horsepower, but it featured Pirelli Racing tires, front and rear aero, and 70 pounds shaved off the DB9 weight. In fact, it was a second faster on the Top Gear test track than the Bentley Continental Supersport. And when they were filming for it in 2006 Casino Royale from James Bond, they accidentally set a Guinness World Record for the most number of rolls in a car crash. Although DBS fans should note they did use a donor car of a DB9 for the actual crash and not the brand spanking new DBS. Can I just say, I want to work in an area where your crash car is a DB9 Aston Martin. Now this is where things get tricky again, because road cars skipped from DB9 to DB11, but there was a DB10 built for the 2015 Bond film Spectre. 10 of them were made for filming and filming only. 0 went to the public, except for a few that were sold off as movie memorabilia. It was based on the V8 Vantage, so it has some styling from it, and it could do, apparently, according to the Aston Martin head, 0 to 60 in 4.3 seconds and a top speed of 193, which is pretty good for a car that only be used in one film and then crashed into a reservoir. Yeah. So the road car was called the DB11, and I gotta say, it's a really good looking car. And it had a brand spanking new platform made entirely out of aluminum to save weight for the first time. And also for the first time, there were 2 engine options available. There was the Aston Martin 5.2-liter V12 making 600 horsepower, or if you wanted to save a bit of money on your ridiculously expensive sports car, you could get the AMG V8 making 500 horsepower. Which was a tie-in partnership between AMG and Aston Martin, which is a match made in heaven. The V8 version, I'll add, is some 250 pounds lighter than the V12, which means it's almost as faster on a track. And while these are still GT cars, they are quite quick around a track. They were designed by former Lotus engineers. They have the quarter mile in under 12 seconds, top speed of 200 miles an hour, and maybe you didn't want the incredibly good chassis, the incredibly good comfort, and the surprisingly good performance for a GT car. You could get the AMR edition, which had an extra 30 horsepower, firmer suspension, and a faster gearbox that shaved the 0 to 60 time down to just 3.5 seconds. But okay, I hear you as well. You in the way back saying 600 horsepower isn't powerful enough. I like your thinking. What about 700 more? What about 715? There we go, that's a pretty good number. The DBS Superleggera came out in 2018 as Aston Martin's flagship GT car. They twin turbocharged that 5.2-liter V12 to again 715 horsepower, 664 foot-pounds of torque, and a top speed of 211 miles an hour. In order to handle all that fury in the rear wheels in an almost 4,000-pound car, they had to give it torque vectoring, a limited slip differential, and an F1 spec double diffuser that makes 400 pounds of downforce on the car at top speed, which is, by the way, the most downforce ever on an Aston Martin road car. So, when is the DB13 coming out? Maybe they won't have it at all. Bad luck name, after all. So maybe they'll skip to the DB14. Either way. Well, we're not sure. The DB11 proved very, very successful. The DBS Superleggera also proved very successful for Aston Martin terms. Unfortunately, Aston Martin got a bit greedy and bought everything from boats to submarines to Formula 1 teams, and they're broke again. God damn it, guys, you got an investment from China, you got a stock market IPO, and you blew it on a boat and a racing team. So now they're broke again, and it looks like Aston Martin may be heading for bankruptcy again. We'll just have to wait to see when the DB name eventually, hopefully, comes out.